No, but yeah, they'll do like cold opens.
Tell me about this. I never heard of this.
Yeah, so like, so like a cold open is like, there's no like jackets or anything involved. Like,
It's so stupid.
it's actually pretty warm outside today. I don't know if we can do a cold open.
No, I mean, I already have a jacket on. I can't do a cold
I took
open.
mine off and put it on the door. So people,
We could probably do a warm open. Has anybody tried that?
hot open.
Hot open.
Anyway, welcome to the Stick and Balls podcast. My name is Archie Smith, and I'm here with my co-host,
Trey Kroll.
and today we're going to be talking about football analytics, NFL analytics. Are you excited, Trey?
Very excited. Very, very excited. It's bright and early here in Reno, Nevada, but I'm ready to get after this.
And listen, it was an optional class for us today for all these people listening, and no one else was here. It was just me and Trey, and maybe some other people in the podcast rooms, but I was just vibing in the classroom, so I miss you guys.
That speaks volumes to our work ethic, though. Nobody else is even here, but we're grinding in the podcast room.
Yeah, if you guys just don't want to grind, you can just tell us. Like, we won't tell anyone.
We're grinding in our hot open.
Hot open. Anyway, NFL. I know a little bit more than the average person about the NFL. I like the 49ers. I really only started following them because they were good. I'm not going to lie, like full bandwagon. But I love the Giants, so like I have a little bit of an in. But in terms of analytics, pretty much nothing. I know the fast guys are good. I know the slow guys usually play defense or on the line. That's all I got. Trey, what can we kind of expect to go over today?
Yeah, just a bit of an intro here, I guess. I mean, I've been into football my entire life, pretty much. My dad taught me how to play from a young age and even got me into stats and playing Madden, so I was just familiar with the entire league, the players, who's good at what, and from a very, very young age, and it's only gotten worse. It's not gotten better. The obsession has only gotten worse. It's taken over my life, but that's why I'm here today, to tell you guys about analytics, because I know a decent amount about it. It's interesting in football because you can probably imagine there's a great part of the community that's very old head, very old mentality. I mean, I'm a Steelers fan. Our own coach is kind of in that same boat where it's like analytics aren't really a huge factor in his decision making or team building or anything, but it's starting to get a lot more popular over the years. I think one of the biggest things I've noticed is like on Sunday Night Football when those players introduce themselves, like they have the PFF grade underneath their names, like, oh, he ranks 14th at his position. Like, I think people are starting to catch on and accept it a little bit.
Yeah. I've seen advertisements for like the crazy analytics like thing you can buy for the NFL that tells you like their heart rate and all that kind of crazy. I'm like, holy, like how deep does this go? Like they got Fitbits on? Like what are we doing here? So Trey, like what are some basics? Like how can I look at a player that like say like Tyreek Hill? Like what can I expect from him, and like what do the numbers say about somebody like him or just in general?
Football in particular is real interesting with analytics because there's so many moving pieces in every play. There's 11 players on the field. Half of them are the linemen who have a certain job. One of them's a quarterback who has a big job. The other 5 or 6 guys on the field have a skill position job. So everybody has something different. It's hard to measure it against each other. So you can really only measure it within the position. I would say there's 2 main avenues that I use. NFL Next Gen Stats is a service that's been launched for a few years now, I believe, and they have a website where they update it like every single week, and they do some of the cool stuff like miles per hour and what's their top speed and whatnot. But then there's also kind of like actual useful information. No offense, I think miles per hour and stuff is cool, but like they're able to measure, like for example, I know you said Tyreek Hill, but let's start with running backs. There's rushing yards over expected. We kind of talked about this, and like I guess with every analytics thing, they're able to generate the expected outcome and then see how you do relative to that. So if you go,
so he's lucky. Is that what that means?
Yeah, it's tough. I think you have to weigh this over time. Like if you see it consistent, like year after year, Derrick Henry is way over exceeding his expectations. Then it's like, okay, he's just really good at football compared to what the average player is expected to do. But you go down this list, and I guess some outliers you could see is, I believe it's 3rd place is Chuba Hubbard, who He's gotten better over his career, but he's still a relatively unknown player, and I don't think he's that great. But he's like third this year. And
He's also my fantasy team.
There you go,
dude.
You just know how to
I
pick
got great
dogs,
running
I
backs.
guess. Yeah,
and I got CMC coming back now.
Sheesh.
He's asked.
Phenomenal phenomenal scouting department. And in fourth place is Jordan Mason on the 49ers. So then it gets even really more interesting because it's like, okay, maybe it's not even about the skill of the player. Maybe it's just the system. Maybe San Francisco just knows how to run the ball. It's not much of a secret, but these stats do kind of say like, hey, whatever's happening here, whether it's the player, his skill, the scheme, they are going above and beyond. Let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum, though. Just kind of out of curiosity now. Who has negative rush yards over expected? Cam Akers from the Minnesota Vikings.
Big.
Negative 71 yards.
That's
below expected.
So with baseball, like we talked about it in the last episode, like they calculate expected stats based on, for hitters, exit velo, launch angle, like where you actually are hitting the ball, like quality of your at bat, stuff like that. How does it get calculated for NFL stats? Is it kind of the same, or what are we thinking?
From what I've observed and gotten into, it seems to be based on just like the pre-snap look. So it's maybe a bit of a skewed way to measure it, but I still think it's obviously the most accurate way we can. But basically, like whatever formation the offense is in, or whatever formation the defense is in, what down it is, first, second, or third, how many yards you have to gain. They basically compile all these little things, like where you are in the field. Like if you're closer to the goal line, obviously you're not expected to get 50 yards because you can't. But it's just like it weighs all these things into account and then gets an output of your expected yards and then compares it to what you actually do.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I love using those stats for baseball, and they help me like with my writing and even with fantasy baseball. I love fantasy baseball. Does it help that you go through this kind of stuff before you'll do a fantasy draft?
I do. Every offseason, pretty much I go through and sweep through like all these kind of advanced stats like this because I think, at the end of the day, like when we're just playing fantasy football and stuff, we don't really care about the analytics. We're just caring about the box score stats. Did you get me yards or did you not? I don't care how many yards you're expected to get. Just get me those yards. But it is good to know. It's more so. It's the same thing as baseball, really. It's more about finding outliers and seeing who can consistently do it, and seeing if maybe somebody's overperforming and saying, hey, like he had a lot of fantasy points last year, but his rush yards over expected was a bit questionable. So maybe going into next year, I'll devalue him in my fantasy drafts.
Yeah, regression to the mean is something we talked about last week.
Absolutely.
So I assume it comes up here.
Yes.
Going back to your Steelers fandom. Who is somebody on the Steelers that you're just like, damn, this guy, he's kind of a dog. Like he performs like he's supposed to, or even kind of gets above, like in that expected range you were talking about.
I will say, kind of on the opposite end of that, before I get into it, is TJ Watt. And he's not necessarily disrespected by PFF, but like last year when they announced Myles Garrett was the defensive player of the year, a lot of it had to do with like PFF stats, like pass rush win rate. That's a mouthful right there. Pass rush win rate. Say that 3 times fast.
I can't.
Exactly. Just a lot of these advanced stats. For some reason, TJ Watt's just never great at them. But then you watch the games and you're like, oh, this guy's a beast. Why is he?
Yeah, like from what I understand, like he's one of the best defensive players in the league. Like he gets ranked pretty high, but now you're telling me this, and my whole world is crumbling.
Yeah, it's not even bad, but he's just like below some other guys, and you're like, okay, how do you?
That's kind of wild.
Where's that come from? But anyways, to answer your question, our rookie middle linebacker Peyton Wilson, I believe he was a 3rd-round pick out of NC State, had a huge interception in last week's win over the Ravens. Basically, his PFF grade every week is phenomenal, and you can see it when you watch the games too. This dude's just all over the field, and that's kind of your job as a middle linebacker. Is you're in the center of the defense. You're essentially the quarterback of the defense, except you're moving a lot more. So he's on top of it. He knows what to do. He knows his assignments, and he just has great instincts. So you can kind of see that reflected in his PFF grade every week.
Asking for a friend, but what does PFF mean?
PFF that's a great question, actually. We should have explained that earlier. PFF stands for Pro Football Focus, and it's essentially like the central hub for like football analytics. There's a subscription you have to buy. They have a lot of public stats, but a lot of it is kind of behind paywalls. And it's gotten to the point where, like I was saying, during the Sunday night introductions, you see their grades on the screen.
I've seen those, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I want to say both the Atlanta Falcons new offensive coordinator and the Houston Texans offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson and Bobby Slowick, worked for PFF within the last few years. So It's one of those things where it's really rapidly expanding it, and teams respect it so much that they're like, oh, yeah, like, you know ball from PFF, so we'll give you an offensive coordinator gig.
Is it kind of, I mean, Are those the only two to ever come out of PFF? And is it kind of becoming more of a pipeline for coaching jobs? Do you think it's moving toward that way in the NFL?
I believe so, and I want to say the Panthers added a scout in this offseason as well who was working with PFF for the last few years. So, I mean, it's a fairly new concept, and even just the broad concept of analytics isn't super widely accepted yet, but they're getting there. And it kind of just goes to show, like, hey, we respect it, and the main point of analytics just kind of says, like, how can you maximize your output? What down and distance should you be running? What plays? The big thing is on 1st and 10, 2nd and 10, don't run the ball. It's just not a good idea. Like, basically, these stats tell you running the ball is a lot less efficient than passing the ball. I know there's a lot more risk, and you can't throw the ball every play. You got to keep the defense honest. But these kind of forward-thinking minds on how can we pass the ball, but in creative ways, not just a simple drop back, but can we get the quarterback on the move? Can we fake a run and then throw it? So these guys seem to just understand those concepts of how to maximize the outcome.
With baseball analytics, I'm sorry I keep going back to that, but it's kind of the only thing I know, but it's good to compare the two.
Yeah. Lots of similarities, I'm noticing.
Exactly. But the Dodgers, they just won the World Series, and I just listened to another podcast that said they converted their entire old visiting clubhouse into an analytics department.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that team won the World Series. They have a full staff of people just, grinding day in, day out, learning how to optimize their players. Is there something similar like that in the NFL? Are we seeing teams who are more like on the analytics side versus old head side, like kind of like you said earlier, or is it still kind of a newer concept in the NFL?
It's a really mixed bag, and like depending on like which teams you ask, analytics is such a broad concept. Like it can mean so many different things. Like we're saying, it can mean your rush yards over expected, your completion percentage over expected. It can be your EPA, the expected points added, which is kind of going back to that point of throwing the ball more often gives you a higher EPA. And sometimes you just find analytics to just be like athletic testing. There was like a meme that came out a couple of years ago. The Bears analytics thing was leaked, and their analytics just consist of like basically just athletic scores, which I don't really know if that's how it works, and that explains a lot about the Bears. But
expected dog in him.
Yeah, expected fastness. Like, okay, dude. So yeah, it's just a broad term, and I think every team at this point is integrating it in some way. But again, it's just such like a broad term. Like my sister at Alabama, they're GPS tracking players even at practices. So I'm sure NFL teams are doing that and beyond kind of behind the scenes.
Do you see it going into like a crazier, more advanced analytics scene like within the next 5-10 years? Or do you think it's kind of going to peter off and go like, I don't know, at least with baseball, like some people really love analytics and some people just like hate it. Like with the Giants, they just fired their president of baseball ops who was super into analytics, and they brought in Buster Posey, who is going to use analytics, but he's more of like an old school, like feel out the game kind of type.
Get a look at the guys.
Yeah, exactly. The eye
use
test.
your eyes to determine,
So yeah, like my question is like, do we see NFL moving more towards advanced analytics, or is it going to kind of taper off?
I think that's the most interesting thing about this is the NFL, when it comes to schematic changes like this, when they do have new information, it almost gets overused. And it gets to the point where it's like a tennis match. You're going back and forth. Defenses are adjusting because they're like, oh, hey, if these teams are going to start passing it all the time on 1st and 10, we're going to get in a formation that stops that. I think when Patrick Mahomes, I want to say Patrick Mahomes like pioneered a lot of this. Like when he first started, he had Tyreek Hill out on the outside. If you get one single high safety, you get Tyreek Hill running down the sideline, you're not going to catch him. So it played a big part in this, and now defenses are starting to go into big pass shells. They're really not letting anything get behind him anymore. It's why the Dolphins don't look as good this year. I know we just mentioned Mahomes. They're winning a lot of games, but their offense doesn't look as explosive as it used to. It's just things like that. It really goes back and forth. And it's ironic. We're almost reaching a peak in like pass heaviness where I think now it's going to start like, oh, hey, the safeties are 20 yards back from the line of scrimmage. Maybe let's just run the damn ball.
Yeah. So my mind went to like analytics on downs, like you were talking about. So like say on a 4th and 1, like what do the analytics say of like going for it versus like punting? Obviously it depends on the time of the game, like how much has elapsed and what the score is. But like, is there anything else that would like let a coach know like, oh, okay, we're going to go for it or not?
That's one of the biggest debates right now is like a lot of coaches are vehemently against analytics. It's like, I'm just going to feel it out. If it's 4th and 1 and the crowd's roaring, we're going to go for it. It's just about the feel of the game. But then the analytics say pretty much anytime it's like 4th and short, go for it. You do the math
Really?
in your head. Even like the worst running backs, their yards per carry average is like 3.5 yards. If you're within 3 yards, then yeah, you should probably go for it. That's his average. If he has an average carry, you'll pick up a first down. But it's all about, again, expected points added. If you think that going for it on fourth down will result in getting a touchdown rather than settling for a field goal or wherever you are on the field, it weighs a lot of that stuff in there. Like you mentioned, the down, the distance, where you are in the field and all that. If you're on your own 25-yard line, it doesn't matter. If it's fourth and short, don't go for it because the other team's going to score right away.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, just like that's what I like never understood. Like as a fan watching, like it's 4th and 1, and they punt it. Like I understand, like even like with the tush push kind of thing that was pioneered by Jalen Hurts. Were there any analytics behind that tush? I mean, obviously not. Like you're on the 1 yard line at the goal. Like it doesn't matter what down if you can trust your dudes to push you over. But like, is there something that like led that kind of coaching decision, and like why are our teams going to start trying new stuff like that in the future? And what do you think about that?
I think like the start of that probably was rooted in analytics. Like, hey, it's 4th and 1. Like we need 1 yard. It can't be that hard to get. But then the whole side of the tush push in this specific case is like, okay, that's just one team finding a super like obscure way to guarantee themselves a yard every time. But I think the root of it is analytics. It's like, hey, again, we need 1 yard. If you can't get 1 yard, why are you on a professional football team, right?
Yeah,
like
valid.
Even on the defense, like they probably understand, like, yeah, we're really good at our jobs. All of us are professional athletes, but it's hard to stop them from getting a single yard.
Yeah.
So I think the basis of that was analytics, but also, do you ever play the Madden games? Any type of football video games?
I mean, I somehow like get super lucky every time I play Madden. I play it like maybe once a year, and I'll just like drop back and just spam a button. I don't know. It throws a 80-yard touchdown. I'm like, oh, dope. I don't know a ton about it, but yeah, it depends on what you're gonna ask.
It's just like the fourth down decisions. Like when we're playing Madden, if it's fourth and within like a few yards, unless it's like 4th and 15, I'm not punting the ball. Like I wonder if maybe that came into play here. Like maybe the new generation of coaches like grew up playing Madden. Now they're like, I didn't punt it on 4th and 5 in Madden.
4th and 7. Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's run it.
We're in range. I can make a big play here.
Yeah, I mean, even I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the Lions, they go for more trick plays. Who's their head coach again?
Dan Campbell.
Yeah, I feel like he has, again, like I'm a pretty casual fan, but I kind of understand that he has a reputation for going for more tricky stuff like fake punts, fake field goals, and doing that kind of stuff. What do the analytics say about faking a punt or faking a field goal or going for those trick plays? Like, why would one coach be more inclined to do that versus another?
It's about aggressiveness, and when you're talking about specific play calls, like if it's a fake punt or a fake field goal, I don't really think it's easy to measure that type of thing. It's easier to measure just like lining up at a base formation, like a typical formation, and being like, okay, you have a 60% chance of getting from here or whatever. But if you're faking a field goal, it's just like so many things can go wrong. You usually don't need, because the punters are usually the people who hold the field goals. And it's like a lot of the times the play is based around them like getting the snap and then doing something with it. I don't know about you, Archie. I'm not very comfortable with my team's punter determining if my team can get a first down or not.
The Niners special team is a joke this year, so I mean, obviously, I wouldn't be inclined to do that. But even just like, I mean, I watched that Cowboys game on Monday, and they went for a fake punt, and just they threw it like 6 yards, and the guy just got blown up,
lit up.
But sometimes, you'll see these compilations on TikTok or YouTube, and it's like coolest trick plays. I'm like, holy, how do they do that? Like, why aren't they doing that every time?
Because it fails a lot of the time.
That was kind of my question. Like the percentage, I'm sure, is not great.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like even Dan Campbell, like the game they played last week. They played who? Like, was it the Bears or somebody that they just?
The Lions beat the Jaguars by like 46 points.
Like they just laid into him. I'm like, well, and I was playing against Amon-Ra St. Brown, and
he got a couple.
I was like, dude, just take him out, man. You're winning by 40.
Yeah.
So along that track, like, are there analytics behind like leaving a player in too long? And like obviously like the percent chance that they get hurt is up the longer they're in the game. But like if you're up 40, like why would a coach leave in somebody like Amon-Ra St. Brown?
I mean, again, that's kind of just personal choice, but there is also like a lot of research into that on both sides of the ball. I mean, you don't see a lot of players, even star players, like we were just talking about TJ Watt. Obviously, I know a lot about the Steelers. He's a great player. You want him in on every play, but there are a few plays here and there where he's out catching his breath. You realize the longevity of his season, his career, his health is a lot more important than having him be on the field for 100% of the snaps rather than 95, if that makes any sense. And what we're seeing a lot, one of the biggest changes of analytics is now running backs are very replaceable, we're finding. So teams are not hesitant to take their starting running back off the field, put the backup in, because they're like, hey, these guys are all like, even backups are like all-world, insane athletes. Yeah. There's different builds and different styles, but they're all still capable of doing similar things. So it's like running backs, especially, their whole job is to take the ball, run hard, get out of breath, and get laid out by somebody like every single time. So it's a very demeaning job, but now they're kind of divvying up the work a little bit.
Yeah. Running backs getting hurt, like I'm sure there's a ton of numbers about it, but as a head coach, like, do you just assume like your running back is going to get hurt at some point during the season? Like, it feels like that happens every year to somebody's star running back. Like, it feels like, oh, boom, there goes his knee, there goes his hamstring.
Probably not the head coach, because head coaches are just full of optimism and rainbows and sunshine and everything's great. My players are great. We're going to do great.
Yeah.
But GMs, every single GM, you'll see in the offseason, they'll go out and get like a quality running back, or if you already have a guy, they'll draft another. I think a good example of this is the Saints. Alvin Kamara's like been one of the best running backs in the league since he entered the league, really.
Except for when he gets suspended.
Except for when he gets suspended for doing things that we discuss on this podcast.
It's a PG podcast.
Yes, yeah, guys. This is a Stick and Balls podcast. We don't talk about things like that. Yeah, but no, like, he's obviously a stud running back, but they still went out an offseason or two ago and signed Jamal Williams from the Lions, who was coming off like a 17-touchdown season, like a real quality
I
running
had him
back.
On my fantasy team during that time.
Of course you did, dude. You're just cracked at scouting these running backs, huh?
But I get last in like all of my leagues, so I'll have like one or two good guys, and then the rest of my team is just terrible. Yeah. But yeah, that was crazy. It was like, cool, he has 30 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns.
Yes,
awesome.
Yeah. It was like Zeke Elliott had a couple of years like that too, where he just, all of his production came off of 1-yard touchdowns, but that still gets you a lot of points. And like the Saints had Jamal Williams. They even went out and drafted Kendre Miller in the 3rd round of last year's draft in 2023. Like, they know they have a great running back, but they seem to also understand the importance of having like a breather back, having a guy that can take 20% of the snaps away from Kamara.
Yeah. Thinking with head coaches still, Andy Reid, probably one of the most successful coaches of all time, at least within the last couple of years. A lot of Super Bowls, very productive in that front. Is there something about him that, analytics-wise or not analytics-wise, that makes him so successful?
Well, we talked very briefly about it a minute ago, about how football is almost like a tennis match. I guess you could also call it like a chess match in that sense, where it's like, hey, you make your move, the opponent can make their move. They can adjust and they can see what you're doing. And that's really what it's all about for Andy Reid, is just adjustments. Again, we saw when they had Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes in his first couple of years as a starter, it was all about airing the ball out. Pat Mahomes has a crazy arm. The defense cannot stop it. They've never seen anything like this. But, of course, defenses aren't stupid. They adjusted over the years, and now they're just playing super far away from them and just getting into these zone coverage looks that don't allow Mahomes to really pick him apart like that anymore. So then Andy Reid, I think it's a collaborative effort with the quarterback too. Like Andy and Patrick were kind of just going back and forth, and now Patrick, in a sense, is almost a game manager because they don't let him throw deep anymore. All he can do is just pick apart the teams, within the 15 yards of the line of scrimmage. It works. It's not as exciting anymore, but it still works. So it's about just kind of like realizing what your strengths are, then realizing what the defense is going to try to do to stop them, and then third, just finding a way to get around that, finding a way to say, okay, if you're going to respect the deep ball, we're just going to run a bunch of shallow crossers, and we're just going to pick you apart that way. So I think that's what makes Andy Reid such a genius, offensive-minded head coach.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much the basis of it all. It's a very complicated sport in terms of analytics. Again, there's so many moving pieces, and analytics in itself is a very broad term. And it means a lot of different things for each position group, for head coaches, for practices, for training, for roster building. It's a very complex topic, and it's just kind of scratching the surface, I think. I think it's going to kind of explode here in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and this podcast, I feel like, is cooler than all of the ones I've done before. No bias, but I just feel like with you last week, you definitely learned some stuff about baseball that you didn't know.
Yes.
And me sitting here, I'm like, wow, this is cool. I understand why people are into this. And
Yes.
we talked about viewer, enhancing the viewer experience with analytics, and just makes watching sports all the more enjoyable. So
Yeah, it just makes things make sense, and you get to put it together when you're watching these games on Sundays or other sports, whatever days it is.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that is going to do it for this second episode of the Stick and Balls podcast. My name is Archie Smith.
I've been Trey Kroll.
And thank you for listening.
See you guys next time.